Hey guys, just filming this here in my kitchen. Anyway, I was out at dinner with an uncle of mine tonight, this guy, pretty cool dude, and he had a question. Why doesn't your generation, the millennials, Generation Y, why don't you have somebody who like speaks for your generation or speaks to your generation? It's kind of an interesting question, because when I thought about it, there was a lot of people in previous generations who spoke to and for them. I'm thinking people like Kurt Cobain, Hunter S. Thompson, James Joyce, these kind of guys. They ended up saying things to and for their generation, both internally and externally. We don't really have this kind of thing. The truth is that for all of the rhetoric that I think we all heard growing up about leaders and us creating leaders in the 21st century, we have a surprising lack of them. Are we just a bunch of losers? If you look at the internet, what you'd see is Elite Daily, the voice of Generation Y. That's maybe true if Generation Y's voice is also a non-crowdsourced BuzzFeed. The people who the media reference when they think about Generation Y are people like Taylor Swift. They reference people like, yeah, I guess I can't think of anybody else. That should maybe scare you, because it scares me. Like, let's maybe do like the Generation Y leadership rundown here. Of all of the elected officials to Congress and the federal government, we have 0 currently under the age of 30. I'm just going to say that again because it's kind of nuts. The youngest person in the U.S. federal government, in the congressional body that creates laws, is 31 years old. Looking at you, Patrick Murphy of Florida. Keep up the good work. And that might not be such a big deal for the Senate, which mandates that somebody must be at least 30 years old. But House of Representatives, someone can be 25. Don't you kind of feel like maybe we should have a voice in this situation? Especially because all of the decisions that these people are making are going to be left with us. We really don't have a voice, I think. We don't really have a lot of people who are speaking for us externally and to us internally from our own stock. And I think it's because we've been severely pacified as a generation. One, helicopter parents, always been around from day one, signing us up for t-ball, soccer, basically always being there. There was a story about parents showing up to their child's Harvard class enrollment and actually signing their own kids up for classes. This is totally ridiculous. Also, that next thing, systemic structures that kids have always been involved in our generation, whether it was t-ball, whether it was arranged hangout. There wasn't any unstructured playtime, or very little of it. And that bleeds into video game thinking. I think that like all of us think in these modes where pieces like Legos should fit together, which isn't really kind of how life works at all. Although I do love building things with Legos, let's be clear about that. And finally, bad economy. Bad economy. I graduated in 2009, and I remember having a conversation with my mom, and she was like, oh, it was a bad economy when we graduated too. I had to work at a job for like 8 months that I really didn't like and didn't pay me very much. And I was thinking, 8 months? I've had to hustle every single day. It's strange. We're headed towards kind of a cliff. The world's coming apart at the seams, and the solutions don't seem to be coming from our generation, which is strange because we're going to be the ones solving these problems in the next 20 years. So I kind of feel like every bit that we read in the media about Generation Y being pacified, being a bunch of losers, nitwits, people who don't get involved in anything is kind of correct. Look at the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. These are people who are essentially doing selfies for charity. And while it's great, they raised $75 million, the most that ALS has ever raised. They're on track to get $100 million, which is awesome. But what did they appeal to? Our selfishness. Look, I'm just concerned that we're going to play into the stereotype that we're a bunch of superficial, selfish, uninterested kids. We grew up in such a corporatized world that it feels like anything that we get involved with publicly has to be sponsored by somebody or for something and take place with a level of our own self-involvement. We're not a very altruistic generation, it feels like, and although we think we care about things like solving ALS or Kony 2012 or any of this kind of stuff, all of these things are packaged and marketed to us in a way that appeals to our self-interest and our sense of identity as a generation, and that appeal is done in a very corporate kind of way. Because that's all we grew up with. And I don't know who is going to stand up and take on a leadership role. Why can't we produce people who solve these problems? Who is finally going to speak in a salient way to us that makes sense? I don't know, but I'd love to hear what you guys think. Leave a comment below. I'm going to go think about this as the madness continues.